Ian Rosenberg, thank you for coming on this morning. I know it was totally last minute. I texted you from the street as I was gathering my materials for my colonoscopy tomorrow, but I really felt like it was very important as a media lawyer, as my friend, to help me understand what just happened with Jimmy Kimmel and what's the significance of this in terms of, is this the death knell of the First Amendment in the United States? Please talk
Okay.
to me. Talk to me as if I were a third grader, because I don't think all of us learned what the First Amendment is in a profound way anyway. Tell me everything you know about the First Amendment and what just happened yesterday.
Well, thanks, Deb. It's a pleasure to get to talk with you always, and also on this video. Um, let's start. Yes, this is, if not the death knell, this is a clarion call to worry if people weren't worried enough already about what free speech means in this country and whether it can continue to exist. But there's been a ton of accurate hyperbole about how dangerous this is, and that's absolutely true. But I do want to talk a little bit. I'm a professor at Brooklyn College. I teach a media law class there, and I do want to talk with through these issues with you, as I just talked with my graduate students last week about a couple of important sort of legal basics that I think will help everyone understand these First Amendment issues better, as you
That's what I
suggest.
want. I just like I want be the teacher, and I would like to be the student.
Okay. Well, I think you're right that almost no one knows these things unless you've been to law school, and even then, if you really focused on the First Amendment. And that's something I try and convey in my books. But let's just start off. So the key thing I think to start with is that when the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, that has now been expanded through the 14th Amendment to not just mean Congress, but it's still to mean also the states. But it still requires state action. So the First Amendment only protects against government interference with our First Amendment and our free speech rights. So I think we need to take a step back and say that unfortunately, Disney, as a private corporation, can do, whatever they want, and there is not a First Amendment legal protection. My wife, Carolyn Lasko, often says this is lawful but awful.
Awful,
Um,
but awful. I
and
like that a lot.
and that, while they are absolutely violating free speech principles, while they are absolutely violating, I think, of the spirit of our free speech laws, because they are private entity, private companies, people don't often know that really your employers can essentially, in all circumstances, control your free speech rights. So that's what they could do, but it is terrible.
And by
But
the way, are doing, right? They are doing that over and over again, except for if you're on Fox News and you call for all homeless people to be murdered.
That's right. I mean, Jimmy Kimmel has been indefinitely, very ominously, the brief statement that Disney put out said that he was indefinitely suspended. So they are doing that. And even one day, I mean, I certainly hope that they clear heads prevail and that they eliminate this indefinite suspension. But even one day of suspension is clearly a violation of free speech spirit or beliefs or principles that we as a country should uphold. But now that we understand that there is a government action requirement, let's now move to why this might be a violation. And I believe it is a violation of First Amendment law in addition to just First Amendment principles. And that's because of the element of government coercion. So we not only, of course, have had the President of the United States, President Trump, in his first term as a candidate and now in his second term, constantly railing against late night hosts who disagree with him and constantly railing against Saturday Night Live, which he's appeared on multiple times, but then always attacks whenever they criticize him. But we don't need to even get into the more difficult question of whether just the president saying these things on Truth Social or whatever is the potential for state action, because we have a much more recent and more specific example with Brendan Carr, the chair of the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission,
Who
which
went
is
on that podcast yesterday or 2 days ago, right? Or yesterday.
Yesterday, I believe. Just a day before that, he had been on a different event where he said that, of course, in actually rebuking the Attorney General Pam Bondi and saying that, of course, First Amendment. Protects against hate speech, and we can get into that
Right.
in a minute. The exact quote he had was, "I think you can draw a pretty clear line, and that the Supreme Court has done this for decades. That our First Amendment, our free speech tradition, protects almost all speech." So on Tuesday, he's saying what he absolutely should said and what every First Amendment, what every FCC commissioner has said before. The FCC can regulate certain aspects of broadcast and television and radio, but they cannot censor content, with the exception of indecent language, which it's another story. We'll talk about it some other day. But other than that, they absolutely cannot. And it seemed like Brendan Carr was cueing that correct line. But then on Wednesday, he said, on a podcast, as you point out, frankly, when you see stuff like this, talking about Kimmel, we can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way. These companies can find ways to change conduct and take action, frankly, on Kimmel, or there's going to be additional work for the FCC ahead. So that, to me, is a very clear threat, basically saying that Brandon Carr, as the head of the FCC, is going to attempt to take regulatory action against a licensee such as ABC television network, which is part of Disney, of course, and that he is attempting to, I believe, threaten Disney to take action. And there has been a principle for more than 6 decades that the Supreme Court has clearly articulated that the government can speak themselves, members of the government can speak themselves on issues, but they can't try and use state power to punish or suppress dissident speech. As recently as last year, in a unanimous decision, NRA versus Hulu, which was so every Supreme Court, even our ultra-right conservative members on the court, agreed that in a case involving New York State government employees saying basically anti-NRA things to the insurance industry and implying that if the insurance industry continued to insure the NRA, that the New York government might go after them, and this is at the early stages of a trial. So whether they actually really were threatening the NRA or just speaking is a debatable issue. But in the case, the Supreme Court assumed that they were threatening to take action in the NRA, and Justice Sotomayor, speaking for all 7 justices,
Which is
said, "quote."
amazing these days, by the way, right?
What was that?
Which is amazing these days to have a unanimous decision.
It is amazing, and one of the few glimmers of hope in the constitutional world right now, and there are very few,
And
is
what
that
did she
this.
say? What did she say?
Well, sorry, let me just say that one of the few glimmers of hope is that the court sometimes can find unanimity on free speech issues. Chief Justice Roberts considers himself the foremost defender of First Amendment rights. I think I wouldn't go that far, but there is some belief in the First Amendment on sort of all spectrums on the court. And what Justice Sotomayor said is that the government reaffirms what it said 6 decades ago, that government officials cannot attempt to coerce private parties in order to punish or suppress views that the government disfavors. And this seems like such a clear example of the government threatening just that. So I just wanted to sort of break down those two elements. On the one hand, Disney can do what they want, even if it's lawful but awful. On the other hand, the government can't threaten private employers to do their bidding because they don't like the speech. And it seems very, very clear, not only Brendan Carr's statements, but then also Trump's statement last night or today on Truth Social, basically lauding the decision and saying that Seth Meyers and Jimmy Kimmel should, excuse me, and Jimmy Fallon should be next.
I know. I mean, to me, it really feels like mafiosi type behavior, right? It's like, asking to pay the VIG, but the VIG is your right to the First Amendment, right? We no longer have, if we can't speak, if Jimmy Kimmel can't make a joke at the
Right.
expense of the president, where are we as a country?
Well, it's a very we're in a very disturbing place, and if Paramount sort of feeling pressure to eliminate Stephen Colbert wasn't enough of a warning shot across the bow of our First Amendment rights, then we now have an even clearer cut example right before us. And I would like to, if we can talk a little further, I
Yeah,
would like to talk about why this is once again not a Republican or a Democrat or a conservative or a liberal issue, but there is just clear cut, even among conservatives, case law that say that satire is absolutely protected.
right.
And the sort of fascinating case, which I talk about in my book, Free Speech Handbook, a nonfiction graphic novel, and the fight for free speech, a longer just text book. There is this case, Hustler versus Falwell. It's from 1998, and it involves this terrible parody in Hustler magazine about Jerry Falwell, the former, now past leader and creator of the Moral Majority. And Larry Flint had published this fake Campari ad that talked about when there was an ad campaign about talking about your first time. And the joke was it sounded like your first time. This was a real series of ads.
Right.
The joke sounded like you were talking about your first time having sex, but it was talking about your first time with Campari. But they did this parody ad where they talked about how Jerry Falwell's first time was drunken sex with his mother in an outhouse. And that's the part I feel comfortable saying. It's
Right.
actually even worse than that. So when we're talking about shocking it, and actually Kimmel said, as you point out, and I know you're going to post the clip, said really nothing shocking.
No.
This was not, the type of speech celebrating someone's death, which might also be protected, but this was not anywhere. But so anyway, going back to this Hustler versus Falwell case, even in this extreme circumstance, in this truly offensive ad, when Falwell sued and won against Flint for essentially emotional distress. It goes up before the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Rehnquist, at the time, perhaps the most conservative Chief Justice in modern history, certainly no friend of the media, certainly no friend of Falwell, of Larry Flint. And the court rules that even satire of this kind has to be protected. And he does it sort of holding his nose because without it, he feels there would be no protection for political cartoons, which he does care about. And I just want to read
Please.
what Chief Justice Rehnquist said. And I think this gets to when people go, well, I might be for free speech, but this was beyond the pale. This is what Chief Justice Rehnquist says. If it were possible by laying down a principle standard to separate the one from the other, meaning sort of terrible speech from acceptable political commentary, public discourse would probably suffer little or no harm. But we doubt that there is any such standard, and we are quite sure that the pejorative description outrageous does not supply one. Outrageousness in the area of political and social discourse has an inherent subjectiveness about it, which would allow a jury to impose liability on the basis of jurors' taste or views, or perhaps on the basis of their dislike of a particular expression. So even Chief Justice Rehnquist is saying that the price we pay as a society for free speech is to allow even the most offensive and hateful and outrageous satire to exist. And again, this is a very conservative court upholding the rights of a very despicable plaintiff. There's sort of
Yeah,
no
Larry
love
Flint
for.
is telling, yeah, that Jerry Falwell was fucking his mother, basically.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And so once again, I think what people need to know about their free speech rights is that a lot of we think these are new things. Well, Trump is new, and no one's ever taken off a late night host before, and that's all true. But these are not unprecedented situations. We are not dealing with a situation where the court has to go, well, I'm not sure what we do. Now we'll figure this out. They have clearly said that satire is absolutely protected. As a matter of constitutional principle. And so, the way we can fight back as a society against these intrusions into our rights is that we have to know what our rights are and what our established, powers and ability to express ourselves entails. Because otherwise, we won't even realize what's being taken away from not only Jimmy Kimmel, who I'm sure will be fine as a person and a comedian, but what we lose as a society if we lose all of the late night critics of the current president.
Well, what I wanted to say is I was actually even nervous asking you to talk to me about this today. Like, are we even allowed to talk about the fact that Jimmy Kimmel was suspended for saying something completely milquetoast? Like, I don't. I, what happens when we lose the right to the First Amendment is that all of us get scared, particularly those of us speaking publicly.
That's right.
Are you
Well,
nervous to talk to me today?
I am constantly, every time I feel lucky enough to get an opportunity to talk about the First Amendment, yes, I am worried about what this means for my career, for the people whose I discuss with. And I don't think that that's an irrational fear, both because of incidents that you point out, both because of incidents. Like with Kimmel, I mean, if Kimmel and Colbert and their very powerful army of lawyers and army of fans,
Opinions, yeah.
and extraordinary wealth, can be taken down, certainly, people without those resources and without that support. And, Timothy Snyder, the Yale historian who has the seminal book on tyranny, came out during the first Trump administration, but it's a must read for everyone concerned about these issues. He has a maxim that he says we should not obey in advance. And what keeps happening in these cases is that the Paramount with Colbert, Disney here, MSNBC firing Matthew Dowd, Karen Attiah being fired at the Washington Post. These are not because they have been sued by the government or because there have been some kind of regulatory actions taken against them. They are capitulating in advance. And I've been reading, a friend gave me this book, Riot Days. It's by, I probably will not say her name correctly, but Maria Alokina. And she was one of the members of Pussy Riot, the revolutionary rock band in Putin's Russia. And she has when she did her first action that actually was brought about her first arrest, she was wearing a t-shirt that said in French, my French is terrible, but it c'est un peu, c'est capituler beaucoup. It says to give in a little is to surrender a lot. And I
Yes.
feel like that's the moment that we're in right now, that people think, well, it's just Jimmy Kimmel. Well, Colbert was an expensive show, whatever. Each time there's some little like, well, I don't really care about that comedian. I don't love him. I don't watch late night. Oh, they're rich. Who cares? But we are each giving up something every time this happens. And we're in a very troubling state right now.
And I'm even afraid sometimes to text my opinion. I mean, that is where we are right now. We're afraid of any visual proof of our dissent of this government. It's funny because when you mentioned Pussy Riot and Russia, like I was there on August 19th, 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed, right?
Wow.
And I had a lot of Russian friends, and I'm running around taking photographs of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I went up to my friend and I said, "This is amazing. Oh my God, you guys are going to live in democracy now." And she looked at me and she was like, "Are you insane? We are we don't just change like that overnight. That's not going to happen. We are destined by our history, by our climate to live, miserable, snowy, pathetic lives. That was what she said, right?
Mm.
And then, Putin came to power soon thereafter. So, I mean, I also can't help but think about who is pulling the puppet strings here, right? We are becoming more and more like Russia.
Yes, and I think the reverse. That's so many important points there. But I also think that person was very cognizant of the fact that it's very difficult to build up democratic
Yeah.
institutions. And I think that for too long, all of us, were too complacent in thinking, well, our democratic institutions have been built up for so long that it will take a very long time. Certainly, we can last through one more Trump presidency. But the erosion, while building up democratic principles, I think takes an extraordinarily long time. Tearing them down is happening frighteningly quickly.
I mean, it's
Um,
been 9 months. That's it. We're not even in the ninth month. Whatever. It's like January 20th until now, right?
yes, and this is all obviously part and parcel of a bigger project. You say sort of, what is the bigger picture? And just last week, or just earlier this week, Trump sued the New York Times
Oh yeah.
for $15 billion. He had previously sued the Wall Street Journal over their Epstein report involving alleging him having given Epstein a bawdy birthday card. He sued them for $10 billion. Remember the conservative Wall Street Journal versus the perceived to be liberal New York Times. And in both cases, this is about much more than the money at issue. This is really about the freedom of the press. And so we have these attacks on the freedom of the press. We have the attacks on Kimmel. And I also think it's important to remember that Kimmel is part of ABC Entertainment, not ABC News. Sometimes I
Very
think
important.
people
Yes. Yes.
are collapsing that. Because I heard one commentator say, well, when Kimmel said that the killer of Kirk might have been Republican, that was wrong, and maybe they should issue a traction. This is a comedian. This is not a news organization that may or may not have to issue a retraction. So we are in a situation here where each one of these incidents is not only engaged in to create a particular result. To bring down Kimmel, to bring down the Times, to bring down the Wall Street Journal. That's part of it. But it's also just about trying to eliminate all forms of dissent. And we go back to what is the true meaning of the First Amendment. And it is, we go to the conservative metaphor of the marketplace of ideas. The whole idea is that the government should not interfere with our ability to express ideas in the proverbial marketplace, which means that we should be able to hear both true statements and false statements and exaggerated statements and partially truths, because, as Justice Holmes said, the best test of truth is the power of an idea to get itself accepted in the market. Slightly paraphrasing there, but there's a lot of problems with the marketplace of ideas. Who gets into the market, and why should people, who is excluded, and why should people with the biggest megaphone of speech be heard? But it is still central and bedrock to our First Amendment understanding, not only today, but from its inception in the 1920s, the modern inception of First Amendment in a case called Abrams versus the United States, which is also in my book, Free Speech Handbook.
So I have one last question, and it's a really important question. You're a lawyer. You understand this so well. You're a media lawyer. You really understand this well. Trump and his lackeys understand what they're doing. They're going to just pick, they're going to cherry pick tiny things in each, in New York Times, Washington Post, anybody that they can attack, they're going to attack right now, except for their friends at Fox and, whatever. But what can I, as a journalist, do? And what can my readers, as US citizens who may not have a public forum, what are we to do with this situation as Americans right now? Give us some hope.
Well, I think the hope comes through, and it let's just acknowledge that this is an extraordinarily dark time, and we are. I don't want to be Pollyannish. We have to look for glimmers of hope, but I do think that the hope comes from two areas. One of the things I talk about in this book and in Free Speech Handbook is that the First Amendment has sort of evolved over time with the strength that it has today from individuals. Sometimes it's the New York Times, sometimes it's major organizations, sometimes it's Nixon suing the New York Times, but most of the time it's everyday individuals. It's Mary Beth Tinker, a 14-year-old student protesting the Vietnam War in Iowa as a middle school student by wearing a black armband to honor the dead on both sides. That created the right to student speech, and the recognition by the court of the right to student speech. So the First Amendment doesn't just happen at the Supreme Court level. I mean, that's when it gets defined, but it happens every day in our schoolrooms, in our community board meetings, at school board meetings, in our houses of worship. And we need, as individuals, we need to be able to speak up for our First Amendment rights, not only for our First Amendment rights for ourselves and for the ideas that we believe in, but for the First Amendment rights of people that we don't agree with.
That
Because that is the spirit of the First Amendment, but that is also what that is also where we can find solidarity, but it is also what the Supreme Court has to be forced to be reminded of, that this is the way they have defined the First Amendment. And if I can, there's one more case that reaffirms how hate speech is protected, and Trump and AG Pam Bondi keep talking about how they're going to target hate speech, and they're using the term in the wrong way. And Trump says he's going to go after John Carl, ABC News correspondent, because he has hate in his heart. And that's just all a misunderstanding of what hate speech really is. But hate speech and speech that we fundamentally disagree with, that maybe almost everyone disagrees with, is protected. As recently as 2017, in a case called Packingham, um, sorry, in a case involving the Westboro Baptist Church, Chief Justice Roberts said two things in upholding the rights of even the hateful Westboro Baptist Church protesting outside of military funerals. Even their rights are protected. He says the First Amendment reflects a profound national commitment to the principle that debate on public issues should be uninhibited, robust, and wide open. Because speech concerning public affairs is more than self-expression, it is the essence of self-government. So that's what we can do. We can recognize that speech on these matters is how we govern ourselves, not just how we are governed by authority figures. We have to learn about our First Amendment rights and then really speak up for them, because otherwise they're going to be taken away at these high levels. And then when it comes to us as individuals seeking to assert them, they will have already been lost.
Right. And then you have the average person who might want to go to, say, what is it, a march against Trump, and being worried that they're going to be photographed by the FBI or by the CIA or by who, God knows whom, with their sign saying, I hate Trump, and be targeted for that. I mean, that's what
And
happens when Jimmy Kimmel gets canceled, is that we all get canceled.
Absolutely, and of course, it's a great irony that the right, which has railed against what they had perceived to be a cancel culture for years, involving hate speech in terms of criticisms or slurs against minorities, that all of a sudden this is true cancel culture, and it is eliminating our speech rights with the given the government extortion or the government pressure that's being imposed on it. That can be a real violation of our rights, and we need to better understand our free speech rights in order to protect ourselves and protect our democracy.
Ian, thank you so much. I feel like I just took a excellent class in law school, and I appreciate you coming on so quickly. I know you were very busy this morning. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I got to get back to my colonoscopy prep.
Well, good luck with that prep. It's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Oh my God.
And
Hold on for a second because I'll press stop and then stay on. Hold on one
all
second.
right. Thanks again.
Thank you. Stop.